Every generation inherits a map of the world. It tells us what success should look like, what failure means, what deserves admiration, what should be feared, and what kind of life is worth living. Most people spend their entire lives following that map without ever asking who drew it. Some reach the destination they were promised and discover an uncomfortable truth. It wasn't the place they were actually searching for. Journey to Ixtlan has endured for decades not because it gives readers a new map, but because it invites them to question whether the one they have been following was ever truly theirs. Whether you see Don Juan as a historical teacher, a literary character, or a philosophical guide is ultimately less important than the challenge he presents. Are you living consciously, or are you simply repeating patterns that have never been examined? Are your goals genuinely your own, or have they been inherited from people who lived in a different world with different fears and different dreams? Are you making decisions based on possibility or based on stories you accepted years ago and never bothered to challenge? Those questions are not comfortable, but growth rarely begins inside comfort. It begins the moment curiosity becomes stronger than certainty. Throughout this journey, we discovered that perception can become a prison when left unquestioned. We learned that remembering our mortality gives urgency to what truly matters. We saw how our personal history can quietly become an identity that limits our future, and how information alone never changes a life until it becomes action. But perhaps the greatest lesson of all is this: transformation is rarely dramatic. It usually begins with a single decision that almost no one else notices. The decision to question one assumption, to replace one excuse with one action, to make one difficult phone call, to forgive one person, to begin one project, to spend one evening with your family instead of another hour scrolling through distractions. Small decisions seem insignificant in the moment, yet they quietly become the architecture of an entirely different life. You do not change your future all at once. You change it one decision at a time. That may be why this channel is called Unchartered Decision. Every meaningful life eventually reaches a crossroads where there is no guarantee, no certainty, and no perfect answer. Only the opportunity to choose with greater wisdom than yesterday. The path ahead may be unfamiliar, but every remarkable journey in history began with someone willing to leave the comfort of what was known. So before you leave today, I want to leave you with one question. Not from Don Juan, not from Carlos Castaneda, but for you. What is one belief about yourself that you have never questioned simply because it has been with you for so long? Sit with that question today. Don't rush to answer it. Observe it. Because the belief that has quietly shaped your life for years may also be the one keeping you from the life you are capable of living. If this journey gave you a new way of seeing yourself or the world, then subscribe to Unchartered Decision and join us as we continue exploring psychology, philosophy, history, and the timeless ideas that help us make wiser decisions in a complicated world. Share this episode with someone who may need to hear it, because sometimes one conversation, one insight, or one uncharted decision is enough to change the direction of an entire life. Until our next journey, keep asking better questions, keep choosing with intention, and never stop exploring the unexplored landscape within yourself. Paragraph 2. If there is one lesson in Journey to Ixtlan that has the power to change a person's life almost immediately, it is Don Juan's insistence that death should become your advisor. At first, that sounds disturbing. We spend our entire lives trying not to think about death. We speak about it quietly, postpone conversations about it, and distract ourselves from the simple fact that every one of us is moving toward the same destination. Yet Don Juan saw something that most people never do. He understood that death is not merely the end of life, it is the force that gives life its value. Imagine walking into a museum where every painting exists forever. You could always come back tomorrow, or next year, or 100 years from now. Suddenly, none of the paintings would feel urgent to see. Their permanence would rob them of their preciousness. Life is the opposite. It is valuable precisely because it is limited. Every conversation, every embrace, every sunrise, every opportunity carries weight because none of them are guaranteed to return. Yet, most people live as though tomorrow has already been promised. They postpone difficult conversations until the relationship quietly dies. They delay pursuing meaningful work because next year seems safer. They wait for confidence before taking action, never realizing that confidence almost always arrives after courage, not before it. They tell themselves they will travel someday, forgive someday, rest someday, become healthier someday, start the business someday, write the book someday, spend more time with family someday. Then, almost without noticing, someday becomes a decade becomes a lifetime. And the greatest tragedy is not that time passed quickly, but that it passed while we were waiting for the perfect moment to begin living. Modern psychology has repeatedly shown that awareness of mortality can fundamentally change the way people make decisions. When individuals are reminded that life is finite, they often become less interested in status and more interested in purpose. They become less concerned with appearing successful and more concerned with becoming fulfilled. Suddenly, the argument that consumed them yesterday feels insignificant. The expensive purchase that seemed essential loses its shine. The promotion they desperately wanted no longer seems worth sacrificing every evening with their children. Perspective changes because priorities change. Don Juan wanted Carlos to keep death close, not because he wished him to become fearful, but because fear often disappears when viewed beside something much greater. Think about the amount of energy we waste worrying about things that will not matter in 5 years. A stranger's opinion online, an embarrassing moment at work, a mistake during a presentation, the fear of looking inexperienced, the fear of asking a question, the fear of hearing the word no. How many extraordinary lives have been quietly reduced to ordinary ones simply because someone was afraid of temporary discomfort? Death has a remarkable way of exposing these fears for what they truly are: small, fleeting, and often imaginary. Imagine if, every morning before checking your phone, you asked yourself one question: if today were one of the last meaningful days of my life, would I spend it exactly like this? Not because you expect tragedy, but because the question strips away illusion. Would you still spend 3 hours arguing with strangers online? Would you keep carrying resentment towards someone who apologized years ago? Would you continue postponing the dream you've been researching instead of beginning? Would you still allow exhaustion, perfectionism, or fear of failure to dictate your choices? The answer may be uncomfortable, but discomfort often reveals truth long before comfort does. Don Juan was not asking Carlos to become obsessed with dying. He was asking him to become obsessed with living deliberately. There is an enormous difference. One person counts the years behind them. The other makes the years ahead of them count. When you accept that your time is limited, something extraordinary begins to happen. Gratitude becomes easier. Forgiveness becomes lighter. Courage becomes more practical. You stop waiting for life to become meaningful because you realize meaning was never hiding in the future. It has always existed in the decisions you make today. Death, then, is not life's enemy. Indifference is. The greatest loss is not reaching the end of life. It is reaching the end and realizing you spent most of it preparing to live instead of actually living. Imagine that someone handed you a pair of glasses the day you were born. You wore them every hour of every day, but no one ever told you they were there. Over time, you stopped seeing through them and began believing they were your own eyes. Everything you experienced, every victory, every disappointment, every fear, every ambition, passed through those invisible lenses. That is the first lesson hidden inside Journey to Ixtlan. Long before psychologists spoke about cognitive biases or mental models, Don Juan repeatedly challenged Carlos Castaneda to see that he wasn't observing reality as it truly was. He was observing a version of reality shaped by years of conditioning. The unsettling part is that this isn't merely a philosophical idea. Modern neuroscience tells us that the brain constantly filters an overwhelming amount of information, selecting only what it believes is important. If you have ever bought a new car and suddenly noticed that same model everywhere on the road, you have experienced this phenomenon. Those cars were always there. Your attention simply began allowing them into your awareness. Now consider what happens when the filter is no longer focused on cars, but on yourself. If somewhere in your past you accepted the belief that you are not good enough, your mind quietly begins collecting evidence to support it. Every mistake becomes proof. Every criticism becomes confirmation. Every compliment is dismissed as kindness or luck. Success feels temporary while failure feels permanent. Before long, you are no longer living in reality. You are living inside a carefully edited documentary produced by your own mind. The frightening part is that most people never realize they are the editor. They assume life itself is speaking, when in fact they are listening to a story they have repeated so often that it sounds like truth. Have you ever met someone who believes the world is filled with dishonest people? Notice how effortlessly they find examples. Then meet someone who believes people are fundamentally kind. Somehow, they also find evidence everywhere they look. The world did not change between those two conversations. The observer did. This realization is both terrifying and liberating, because it means that many of the walls we believe surround us were built long before we encountered the situations we now blame. Think about the countless invisible scripts modern society quietly hands us. Success means earning more than your neighbors. Happiness arrives after the next promotion. Rest is laziness. Busyness is importance. Owning more means becoming more. Every notification deserves immediate attention. Every disagreement must be won. Every opinion must be defended. Every moment of silence should be filled with another video, another message, another distraction. We rarely ask who wrote these rules. We simply obey them until they become indistinguishable from common sense. Don Juan did something extraordinary with Carlos. Instead of giving him new beliefs, he kept taking old ones away. Every certainty Carlos clung to was questioned. Every explanation that made him feel comfortable was gently dismantled. Not to humiliate him, but to free him. Because a mind convinced it already understands everything has nowhere left to grow. Imagine carrying a backpack filled with rocks your entire life because someone told you they were necessary for survival. You struggle to climb every hill, wondering why the journey feels so exhausting. Then one day, someone asks a question you have never considered. Who told you that you had to carry those rocks? Suddenly, the problem is no longer your strength. The problem is the weight you never realized you could put down. Perhaps that is why so many people feel trapped without understanding why. They are not imprisoned by circumstances alone. They are imprisoned by unquestioned assumptions about themselves, about success, about failure, about love, about happiness, and about what is supposedly possible. The first lesson of Journey to Ixtlan is not that the world must change before your life improves. It is that the moment you begin questioning the invisible lenses through which you see the world, you take the first step toward discovering that reality has always been far richer, far more hopeful, and far more open than you were ever taught to believe. Imagine waking up tomorrow and discovering that almost everything you believe about yourself was handed to you before you were old enough to question it. Your definition of success, your fears, your ambitions, even your understanding of happiness. You call them your beliefs, but are they? Or are they echoes of parents, teachers, friends, advertisements, traditions, and a society that quietly taught you what a successful life should look like? Most of us never stop to ask. We simply inherit a map and spend the rest of our lives following it, assuming that because it is familiar, it must be true. Then one day we wonder why we feel lost, while faithfully following directions we never wrote. More than 50 years ago, a book appeared that challenged this quiet assumption. Journey to Ixtlan, The Lessons of Don Juan by Carlos Castaneda, did not become famous because it provided easy answers. It became unforgettable because it asked questions that most people spend an entire lifetime avoiding. It questioned identity. It questioned certainty. It questioned the way we perceive reality itself. The book remains controversial to this day. Scholars continue to debate whether Don Juan Matus existed exactly as Castaneda described, while others argue the narrative should be understood as philosophical or symbolic rather than historical. But regardless of where one stands in that debate, the ideas continue to survive because they touch something universal inside every human being. They ask a simple but unsettling question. What if your greatest limitation is not the world around you, but the way you have learned to see it? Think about your daily routine. You wake up at roughly the same time. You travel the same roads. You speak to many of the same people. You worry about many of the same problems. Eventually, life begins to feel predictable, almost mechanical. Yet nothing about existence is ordinary. Your heart continues beating without your permission. A tiny seed becomes a towering tree. Entire civilizations rise and disappear within the blink of history. The universe expands while you sit scrolling through your phone, unaware that the greatest mystery imaginable surrounds you every second of your life. Somewhere along the way, we stopped noticing. We traded wonder for routine, curiosity for certainty, and exploration for repetition. Don Juan believed this was one of humanity's greatest tragedies, not because life became less extraordinary, but because we stopped seeing it. Perhaps that is why so many people reach the goals they spent decades pursuing, only to discover the happiness they expected never arrived. The promotion comes, yet anxiety remains. The house gets bigger, but peace does not. More money enters the bank account, while meaning quietly slips away. We keep changing our circumstances without questioning the assumptions driving them. We become experts at improving the map, while never asking whether it leads where we truly want to go. Tonight, this is not a story about Carlos Castaneda. It is not even a story about Don Juan. It is a story about you, about the invisible beliefs quietly directing your decisions, about the fears you inherited instead of choosing, about the identity you've spent years protecting without ever asking whether it still serves you. Every lesson that follows is an invitation, not to believe someone else's truth, but to examine your own. Because sometimes the most extraordinary journey is not traveling to a distant place. It is discovering that the person you have always believed yourself to be may only be the beginning of who you can become.